In this brief presentation, we'll look at a few passages from Mohamed Hamri's Tales of Joujouka, which is a really interesting brief text on the pipes of pan musicians in the village of Joujouka in the Rif Mountains in northern Morocco. This information is being presented largely to an audience presumably not familiar with who Hamri is or who Joujouka is or what has taken place in the village of Joujouka for many millennia. And so I want to just orient those unfamiliar with this material. Again, it's intended for a reader coming to Hamri's text for the first time and curious to learn more about the culture of Morocco, of the Maghreb more generally, but of the whole Joujouka village scene in particularly. All right, there you can see Mohamed Hamri. He lived from 1932 to the year 2000. He was, as a very young man, he was befriended by Paul Bowles, who is a very prominent American writer who lived in Tangier for most of his adult life and was a translator of Moroccan writers, Maghrebian writers. Bowles did not translate this particular text, but he was friends with Hamri, and he helped him get established in Tangier. And Bowles himself was quite interested in the music of Morocco, and so he was fascinated as well by the musicians of Joujouka that Hamri introduced him to. Now, I should note too, the image that I just showed you in this previous slide is a painting by Hamri. Hamri was a wonderful artist as well. His paintings exhibited in Paris with Brion Gysin, who was a surrealist artist as well and writer, and had a cafe in Tangier that Hamri himself served as a cook at. They was called Thousand One Nights. They were basically co-owners of this cafe until Gysin bought out Hamri's share. Later, the cafe closed down, and Gysin and his friend William S. Burroughs, also one of the famous Beats, along with Ginsberg and Kerouac, who were in Tangier around the same time Jack Kerouac, went to Paris and lived in the what is today in the Latin Quarter in the Rue Saint-Germain-des-Prés, right off the Place Saint-Michel. You can visit that hotel there as well, if you ever get a chance to go to Paris, as well as the hotel where Burroughs and Kerouac stayed in Tangier, which is the Hotel Munira. So Hamri was in this group of people, and but he brought something very special. Besides being a very talented artist, he was the nephew of one of the master musicians of Joujouka, and he very much culturally enriched the expatriate community living in Tangier by introducing them to the musicians of Joujouka. Now, this is a very brief little text. The translator is Blanca Nyland, who translated the text from the Maghrebi to the English in 1975, published by Capra Press. Just a delightful collection of tales that give background into the history of the Joujouka legends as told from Hamri's perspective. Now, if you look on these two maps here, you can see, if you look to the map on the left, you can see Tangier right there by the Straits of Gibraltar, and Joujouka just a little south there. I think it's about, I don't know, it's not easy to get to. It's about an hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 by bus from Tangier, not because it's that far, but because of the routes that you have to go through. But it's also, if you look to the left, you can also see Chef Chouan, which is also close to Joujouka. This is all in the Rif Mountain area, and so the culture of the Rif Mountains is very similar. Now, while Tangier is an international city that has something of a European flavor, albeit grounded in a very particular Maghrebian cultural setting, Joujouka is a much more remote village, and this is the village where the Pipes of Pan recordings were made, and where each year people go to celebrate the festival of Bou Jouloud, who is one of the key, well, the goat man in effect of the city, which I'll show you an image of that in just a moment. But here you can see this is Brion Jones. He was with the Rolling Stones in the early period of the Stones. He died of a drug overdose, unfortunately. But so if you go, back in the early days of the Rolling Stones, Jones was a pretty prominent figure. He went to Morocco. He met Brion Gysin. He met Shukri. He met Hamri, and that through that association, he was very riveted by what he heard at Joujouka. He recorded the music of the master musicians of Joujouka, and this became a very popular album. Later, after Jones died, the Rolling Stones would go back and they did more recordings with the musicians of Joujouka. But this is a really interesting album, and you can easily find it on YouTube. And I do encourage you to listen to it. It's quite enjoyable music. Now here you can see Brion Gysin, William S. Burroughs, and Paul Bowles. On the far left is Gysin. He was an associate of Andre Breton, who was a very prominent surrealist. And so Gysin was very much steeped in surrealism, and he is often credited with introducing Burroughs to surrealism. And this had a huge influence on Burroughs' literary production. If you read Burroughs' writings prior to, say, his most famous work, Naked Lunch, they're very interesting to read, but they're novels of fairly conventional literary realism. I mean that in a generic sense. They do deal with quite, topics at that time that were taboo. Burroughs was a heroin addict, and he wrote about his addiction. One of his early novels was entitled Junkie, but Junkie, for instance, reads like a standard novel of realism, whereas when you read Naked Lunch, which is set, by the way, in Tangier, you can really see the profound impact of the surrealist movement upon his writing, and that was largely due to the influence of Gysin. And Burroughs had an enormous respect for Gysin. Now, Gysin and Hamri would Gysin was an artist, and he and Hamri both did an exhibit in Paris together. Now, on the far right, you see Paul Bowles, and he and his wife, Jane Bowles, they lived in Tangier for many, many years. Bowles lived there for most of his adult life, and most of his writing is set in the Maghreb. And he was a wonderful translator of Maghrebian Moroccan writers as well. And so this was the milieu that Hamri lived among as a young man. And he, again, became very closely, like Burroughs, he became closely associated with Gysin when the two of them owned this restaurant together. And then at the restaurant that they ran together, they made arrangements to bring some of the master musicians of Joujouka to Tangier. And this was very important because it also enabled their financial survival even. Here you can see what the Rif Mountain area looks like in northern Morocco. It's a very beautiful area, and there's a lot of cultural diversity. Historically, Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike have lived there in relative peace for many centuries. The people are predominantly Berber, although there's also a significant Arab population and a mixed Arab-Berber population as well in this part of Morocco. Here's from Chef Chouan, a call to prayer, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. So there you can get a sense of what the call to prayer from the Moisin sounds like. And it's very interesting because there's a kind of a dialogue that emerges in the valley. This is in Chefchaouen, the famous blue city. And as you can see, this area is predominantly Muslim, but for many, many years, Jews lived here as well. And there are Christians. And again, as I said, they lived in harmony with one another. Now, this Chefchaouen is not the same as Joujouka, but they're very close by and they're part of the same culture. And you may have even heard of the famed city. That's the Blue City. Very, very intriguing, beautiful city, painted blue, and very much a part of the culture of the Rif Mountains that Hamri originated from. Now, in the Rif Mountains as well, there's a great deal of marijuana that grows. It's famous for its hashish and marijuana, or its keef that is smoked. Now, in the United States, of course, here in the state of Washington, marijuana, hashish is completely legal. It's at least in the state of Washington it is, and it's increasingly that way all over the United States. It's not completely legal in Morocco, but it's also something that is very widely and in many cases even openly one imbibes in the hashish and the keef. You can see, I'm going to show you in a minute. I'll show you what the subsea pipes look like that it's smoked in. But this is important because many of the stories of Bou Jouloud and the stories of Joujouka, as we'll see, are connected to the culture of keef and the culture of hashish. Majoun, and this was also a prominent theme in the writing of Paul Bowles as well as Mohamed Hamri, because it's very much a part of the culture. Now, it's a Muslim culture, so typically alcohol, one refrains from alcohol, not so much the case with cannabis. Now, in this image here, you see, I wanted to just to kind of provide a little bit of depth, a little bit of historical depth, background, context for understanding one of the reasons why so many have been so fascinated by the Joujouka Festival. And part of it is because the culture of Morocco, the history of Morocco, the culture of Morocco is a very old and ancient culture. Now, what this map shows you is how this is a map of the Roman Empire, and you can see there where Morocco is on the far, by the Straits of Gibraltar in Spain, and Morocco was very much a part of this culture. And so when we think of the Rif Mountains, and we think of Chefchaouen, and we think of Joujouka, you can see, if you look closely, you can see at the very bottom there, in the Moroccan section of this map, you'll see Volubilis, which is a Roman city that there's still quite a few ruins there that you can visit and have a look at. This was a culture. If we think of Islam, so Islam comes into the region, maybe 1,200 years ago or so, and the Prophet Muhammad was alive about 600 years after Christ, and Islam spreads very quickly. But what's important to remember in this setting is that, first of all, most Maghrebian people are not Arab. So the Arab religion comes into this region from the Saudi Arabia area, from a different culture, different language, different people. Most of the people here were Berber. Augustine, for instance, was Berber. He came from this area as well, a very important Christian saint. And so it was historically a Berber culture, but it was a culture also that was influenced very much by Rome, and the Romans colonized and settled here, created cities here. And so the Joujouka cult is, as we're going to see, is in some ways historically connected to this older cultural substratum, this pre-Islamic Berber, Roman, Latin culture, which has been in the region for many years. And I'll give you some more illustrations of this. But here you can see these are some Roman ruins in Volubilis, which is not far from Joujouka, a little south. It's outside of Fez. and it's one of the Roman cities that's pretty well preserved. It's a lot of fun to walk around and look at. Here you can see a mosaic. Now this mosaic was at Volubilis, but it was moved to Tangier, so you can see it in Tangier. But it's an enormous Roman mosaic, and Romans created a lot of mosaics too, and many of them, there are some that are still in Volubilis, but in order to preserve them because of their exposure to the elements, some of them have been removed. Like this one, for instance, is indoors, and it's enormous. It takes up a big space on the floor. Here's a statue, a Roman statue, recovered from Volubilis, and you can see there the disrobed woman who is lying with the sheep, or on top of the sheep. And this is something we want to come back to and think about as we think about the Joujouka cult. Now here, this is also a Roman mosaic, but it's not from Volubilis. It is from Rome itself, where a celebration was held every Ides of February, or 15th of February, known as Lupercalia. And so this mosaic marks Lupercalia. You might notice the man there holding the whip. And so as you're going to see also that the goat man, who is, the Joujouka figure who appears during the celebration in Morocco that are held usually in June, that the goat man appears when the pipes of Pan are played, or when the musicians of Joujouka, master musicians, play their pipes. He comes out, he whips people. He's linked to fertility rituals, to making the fields grow, but also for women who feel his lash, and in fact, in a symbolic sense, come to be fertile in the earth. That's part of the reason why one hopes to be whipped by Bou Jouloud in these festivals. Now here is a Roman, a painting of the Roman ritual, February 15th celebration of Lupercalia. It's linked to fertility, love, the erotic as well. It's a celebration of sexuality. Here you can see a painting that depicts a kind of a Roman orgy taking place, as every February 15th. People get gloriously drunk and celebrate, and have a sexual festival. And you can see there if you look at in the center, you can see a man there who is a half man, half goat, a kind of a Pan figure. So we think, well, who is Pan? Pan is a half man, half goat figure, said to be the teacher of Eros or Cupid. And you can see there a man carrying a goat, getting ready to sacrifice it. So often in the Lupercalia celebrations, in addition to licentiousness and drinking a lot, there was a sacrifice of a goat involved as well. Now this, you can see here's another Roman image. You can see there two men carrying these whips, and they also have goats suspended over their shoulders. And there is a woman who is coming, who is pregnant. And part of the reason, again, you want to receive the lash and the Lupercalia celebration is to become pregnant. Now, as we're going to see, this notion passes also into this Joujouka tradition, which, as I said, is pre-Islamic, is in Morocco long before Islam arrives. Now, on the left, you see Saint Valentine, and in the Christian tradition, once Rome becomes the Holy Roman Empire, the celebration of Lupercalia is canceled, and it's moved from February 15th, or the Ides of February, to February 14th, in order to distinguish between Lupercalia and the Christian celebration of Valentine's Day. And so, as happened in many cases, when Christianity spread in the Holy Roman Empire, it built temples and places of worship on the sites of former secular deities. And many of the celebrations that pre-existed in the Christian tradition became transformed by the Christian tradition into something else. And so if we think of what today we think of Valentine's Day, it has this early origin, which is linked to Lupercalia, which again becomes transformed. And so we could say, well, one of the things that Joujouka has in common, the village of Joujouka has in common with us here in the United States, like say at Western Washington University, presumably those who are listening to this lecture, is that we all have been influenced by Lupercalia, but it's become transformed. In the case of the Christian tradition, Lupercalia became Christianized, and we can say in the case of the Islamic tradition, Lupercalia became Islamicized, or it became affected by the Islamic religion that came to the area in the days when Arab peoples brought Islam to the Maghreb. So we still today celebrate Lupercalia. The figure of Venus is associated with roses. In the story of the Golden Ass, for instance, Lucius has to eat roses when he becomes a man transformed into an animal. We can think of animal sexuality, that part of sexuality is about the question of our animality. And so in order to have his humanity restored, Lucius, in the story of the Golden Ass, must eat the roses. And when he does, the goddess Venus appears before him. And so Venus is the mother of Cupid. We can think of the little wanton boy with his bow and arrow and his wings. And if he strikes you with his bow and arrow, you're going to fall in love. This is what he does. Even Zeus, for instance, or Jupiter, in the Roman tales, is not immune to the bows and arrow, to the arrows of Cupid. Once you get struck by those arrows, you're going to do crazy things. And so love is not a rational thing, the attraction that one feels for the other. And so this is sort of a celebration of the erotic, of our essential animal nature as well. This is partly what is entailed by this very ancient custom and tradition. Here you can see an illustration or painting of Venus and Cupid. If you Google, I would just encourage you to Google Venus and Cupid, and you'll see many, many paintings and statues that were dedicated to these two figures, mother and son, in the Roman and Greek tradition as well. When we're in the Greek tradition, we're speaking of Aphrodite and Eros, and Eros becomes Cupid, Aphrodite becomes Venus. But in the story of the Golden Ass, for instance, even Eros will sometimes, or Cupid sometimes, will strike his own mother with the arrows of love, and he's described as a kind of a naughty boy. He goes around, shooting his bow. You can see there her holding. You can see the little quiver of arrows there, and Venus holding an arrow in her hand. And once you get struck with that arrow, then you're just going to go out of your mind. That's basically the idea, and this includes the mother of Cupid as well. Now, in the Joujouka festivals, you can see there in the middle, the pipes of Pan musicians are playing, and then there's a drawing on the far right of a goat man. You can see and you can see also photographs of what he looks like today. So let's play a little music and hear what it sounds like. We'll do that I'll do that in just a minute. So here's first I'm going to read you a quote from Hamri. This is from Tales of Joujouka. He says, "In my village of Joujouka, high in the blue hills of northern Morocco, we are blessed with many sanctuaries where holy men lie sleeping. In one village nearby, 101 saints lie buried. All were unique men, each with his own vision and deeds. Another village has a saint whose name is the guardian of the sea and the direct conductor of the sun. Our saint is Sidi Ahmed Sheikh. His title is cultivator with lions and healer of crazy minds. He was a poet, musician, philosopher, and scientist full of blessing. When he first came to Joujouka, the village didn't exist. In the year 600, Sidi Ahmed Sheikh was traveling in the mountains of Ash Sarif with 5 people. Here he found a perfect place. The blue-tinted hills were covered with lush vegetation and watered by abundant rock springs." So what I think is worth noting here too, I mean, even today, people will go to Joujouka in order to become healed. And partly what they come to be healed, or largely, I should say, what they come to be healed for is for mental afflictions or mental illnesses. And so So the music has a function, and that function is a healing function. And the saint, one goes there and prays and does homage to the saint, and who is buried there, and then becomes healed. And so what I want to then be aware of, just to make sure that you're aware of, is that this tradition of praying on the tombs of saints, or coming to the tombs of saints and exchanging vows and saying prayers in order to become healed, this is not something that just exists in Joujouka. This is very widely practiced throughout the Maghreb and the Sahel as well, for instance, in Timbuktu. And it's also one of the factors that make this area very distinct. And while Islamic, we can think of this as an Islam that has been transformed by pre-Islamic traditions, or an Islam that we could think of a kind of a syncretism that has developed, in which Islam and customs, beliefs, practices that existed long before the coming of Islam continue to persist. Now, this is something that some Muslims outside the region, particularly Wahhabi Salafist Muslims from the Arabian world, the Gulf states, find to be heretical. And so this kind of practice is something that some in the Arab Wahhabi world will say is simply heretical, as in wrong teaching. And to the extent that some people who live in the Gulf states area and in the Arab regions that are more influenced by the Wahhabi tradition and the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, won't even come to Morocco because they don't even think of it as Islamic, and they're very much opposed to these Sufi practices that are very, very ancient and very important part of the culture. Now, here on the right, this is an image of Ahmed al-Tijani. He was a Berber man who founded the Tijani order, who was buried in Fez, Morocco. And he had his teachings anyway. He didn't go to West Africa, but his teachings had a very prominent impact on the history of West Africa, particularly through the historical figure Al-Hajj Omar Tall, who brought the teachings of the Tijani order from Mecca to where he was initiated by Mohamed AlGhali, who was a disciple or a talib of Sheikh Ahmed al-Tijani, who lived in Algeria, Morocco area, and is today buried in Morocco. So it's going to the tombs of the saints is a very important part of the Sufi practices. And so this is the Joujouka instance is only one instance of something that is practiced very widely. Now, in the case of Sheikh Ahmed al-Tijani, who's buried in Fez, many West African Muslims, before they take the pilgrimage to Mecca, will first stop at his tomb in Fez, and then will go on from there to Mecca as they continue their Hajj or pilgrimage. Now here, I want to give you an example. This is a quotation from the Tariq al-Fatash, which is a very important Timbuktu chronicle that it includes. And this is just one small instance of this. In the manuscripts of Timbuktu, you'll find many other cases or discussions of these kinds of practices, where advice will be given about what can happen to you if you go to particular tombs, what sort of beneficial effects will happen. So, for instance, I'm quoting directly from the Tariq al-Fatash, which was a manuscript that was a 15th, 16th century manuscript, about 400 or 500-year-old manuscript. And it reads, tombs that procure the fulfillment of vows that are made near them are as follows. First, the tomb of Qadi Uthman Darimi procures the fulfillment of vows made near it, which is unanimously acknowledged from tried experience. None of the vows that are made at this place are fruitless. This would be Muhammad Qadi or his son, or grandson Ibn al-Mukhtar, have seen this verified with my own eyes, having myself made prayers to God near this tomb, which God granted to me. God be praised and thanked for this. Second, the tomb of Sidi Yahya, whose effectiveness has been verified, as I have seen and heard from a great number of persons who have given proofs of it and seen its effectiveness, as I have attested. The jurists of Timbuktu, along with many whom I have met there, have made repeated visits to it, including Sidi Ahmed Baba and the two eminent jurists, Ibrahim and Muhammad, both of whom are sons of Ahmed Bagayoko. Now, I'm pretty sure this is Ibn al-Mukhtar. There was more than one author to the Tariq al-Fatash. It was a compilation of authors from the Kati archives in Timbuktu. And Mahmud Kati himself in Timbuktu, his people go to his tomb today to pray for rain. So you can see each tomb is said to procure different effects. And so, for instance, when Al-Hajj Omar also went to Mecca, he prayed at the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad, exchanged vows in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad, who was presumably, who was in the ground with Muhammad AlGhali there. And this practice is something that the Wahhabi tradition, which developed much later in the 19th century in Saudi Arabia, is very uncomfortable with. And later the Wahhabi adherents will go so far that they even destroyed the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina. But this is not that iconoclastic interpretation of Islam is not a part of the way in which Islam is interpreted in the Maghrib or the Sahel. Let me read you one other one. The tomb of Alpha Muhammad Tule at Hyundai Biri, whose efficacy has been proven. This is the regular meeting place for people who suffer from leprosy, both those who are mildly afflicted and the terribly deformed. God welcomes the intercession of this saint on their behalf, which leads to their healing, as I have witnessed myself on many occasions. And so in this case, one goes, if one has leprosy, this would be the tomb that one goes to. So in the case of the tomb of the saint at Joujouka, one goes to be recovered from mental illnesses, and the listening to the music is related to that as well. Now here you can see an image. This is a tomb in Timbuktu that was destroyed when the city was invaded in 2012 by Wahhabi jihadists associated with the Ansar Din and Akim, or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghrib, who are very opposed to these practices. And so they view them as un-Islamic in effect. So Mohamed Hamri then says in this text, Tales of Joujouka, he's telling us the story of this saint who decided to stay in Joujouka. And says, during the night he heard strange music. It was a music he had never heard before, and he was inspired to write a poem about it. In the morning, he sent one of his people to find the source of this unique sound. The man found a camp of musicians some 5 kilometers away. The leader of the group was Atran. When Sidi Ahmed Sheikh saw them, he knew all about them before they told them their story. As Sidi Ahmed Sheikh listened, he realized the blessing that brought Atran to this place. Because the Retas suck the air in and blow it out at the same time, this is the pipe, the musical pipe, he understood a way of healing with music. The energy could be taken in, converted, and sent directly to the brain. Such a powerful contact with a sound and pitch so high could be used with the blessing of Allah like a surgical tool to heal sick minds. So this is Hamri's description of this. And so we see here that it's in addition to the presence of the saint at the tomb of whom one prays, there's also something in the music itself that is healing. And so we could think of the experience of the music as a healing experience. In the North American context, Jim Morrison of the Doors, for instance, used to think of himself as a kind of a shaman, that people would go to his concerts, listen to them, and then they could become healed by the music that they heard. And so music would take on a ritual ceremonial character. Oliver Stone in his film The Doors made a great deal about this dimension of Morrison's beliefs and thoughts and poetry. But William S. Burroughs is going to say of the Joujouka Festival, that's the oldest rock and roll festival in the world. So we have rock and roll festivals that are played every year, and sometimes they're repeated. Here in Seattle, for instance, we used to have WOMAD before 9/11, that every year musicians from all over the world would come play. Peter Gabriel organized that. But these traditional festivals, we can think of this in the way, at least that Burroughs characterizes it. We could think of the Joujouka Festival as being within this trajectory as well. So here you can see in the village now, if you go to Joujouka, most of the time these festivals, they're held in June, and people go and they'll stay for about a week or so, and they'll listen to music nonstop. It's a quite interesting experience for those who have the opportunity to participate in it. Here's some sounds from Joujouka. This was recorded in 2018. So people will come from all over the world to participate in this festival, and it's very limited, the occupancy to participate. So people have to sign up for it quite early. But musicians, famous people, and so on have come and really enjoyed this experience. But it's partly, again, it's thanks to the collaboration of figures like Hamri, Bowles, Gysin, Burroughs, and Brion Jones, and then later Mick Jagger and the other Rolling Stones, that this what was an obscure village came to much greater international prominence in the 1960s, 70s, up to the present. Here's Hamri. He says the musicians became very famous playing the music. This would be in the previous days of Sidi Ahmed Sheikh. Until one day they were invited by the first king of Morocco to come and play for him. They played in all his palaces, and often the musician would be gone for so many years that he would come back to Joujouka and find his son grown and himself a master musician. The master musicians of Joujouka became royal musicians for the dynasty of Sherfa Alauin, direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. From that day until now, the descendants of Atarin have continued to play sacred music for 12 generations of kings and queens of Morocco, Hamri says with great pride. The sanctuary of Sidi Ahmed Sheikh also became very famous. Through the centuries, many miracles occurred at his shrine in Joujouka, always with prayers and the sacred music composed when Atarin the musician and Sidi Ahmed Sheikh lived in the hills of Al-Sharif. So it's quite interesting the way there's a confluence of these different traditions, the Lupercalia traditions, the pre-Islamic traditions of venerating the tombs of holy people, and the performance of the music as well, linked to the idea of healing. When the master musicians of Joujouka are not playing music, Hamri tells us, they enjoy a pipe of the mountain keef mixed with a small amount of tobacco to sweeten it. They like to smoke in the morning in order to relax and prepare for the day, then also in the afternoon, and again at night to relax after whatever may have happened during the day. In truth, they smoke all day, while the keef grows wild and free in the Blue Hills. The tobacco must be cultivated, and this is a tricky business. Tobacco is the devil's own favorite smoke, and he does a lot of mischief with it. The plant itself is imbued with magic, we're told. Now, the keef is often, you can see that, well, there's some images of the keef. You can see the subsea pipe, and it's, often you put it together. There's the hashish, and then there's the There's the keef that is then put in the pipe. And as he says, people will smoke, all day long. And so it's also part of the festivities, but it's a part of the culture more generally, not just on the days of the celebration of the Joujouka rites. Titi's tobacco was famous in the mountains. It was both hot and sweet, and it was good or bad from one moment to the next. Hidden behind a strong fence of giant blue cactus, Titi accomplished much magic with his plants. Every morning and night he would go among the plants and fart on them. Since this is the devil's favorite sound and smell, the tobacco grew very strong. Behind a fence of giant blue cactus, Titi is still doing his magic with the tobacco plants. Of course, the devil knows the tobacco is doing the magic with Titi. Sometimes when thunder sounds in the little blue hills for no apparent reason, we know the devil is enjoying a big laugh about Titi's tobacco. So these are charming little stories about the history of the region. And so it's a nice way to get an introduction to this culture and to read some really wonderful literature that Hamri has put together. So he tells us further. Now here we're going to get a little bit more into the question of the goat figure. The people of Joujouka speak of an ancestor named Attar who herded goats and lived in their village long ago. In the hills surrounding Joujouka, there was a remote forest cave, and the villagers feared to enter its precincts. One afternoon in the cave, Attar awoke from his dream and found himself face to face with an awesome creature, huge and terrifying, half goat and half man. Attar jumped to his feet and tried to run away, but the creature stopped him and said his name was Bou Jouloud, father of Skinna, and that it was he who made the unearthly sound with a piece of bamboo cunningly pierced. Attar relaxed and gazed at Bou Jouloud in wonder. So this is this figure, again, linked to the Pan figure, the figure who is half goat, half man, and is also wrapped up in these festivities. When the villagers played the next evening, Bou Jouloud danced out of the hills in a frenzy of anticipation and entered Joujouka for the first time. He danced among the villagers furiously for hours, whipping the musicians with branches, until, led by Attar, they played their wildest and most inspired music. When they could play no more, the women began to sing and play drums, and Bou Jouloud danced among them. After this, the fields grew fertile, the herds of animals throve, and the woman bore many strong children. Year after year, the villagers placated Bou Jouloud in this way. So it's fascinating the way these pre-Islamic, these traditions, hundreds of years old, linked to Lupercalia, continue to persist, but transformed, Islamicized, and yet still very much a part of the culture that made Moroccan in its own very particular way. There's a picture of one of the master of the Bou Jouloud figure you can see he's wearing the goat skins and holding the tree branches, who appears when the musicians play. And this music has a very hypnotic quality, and you can see how it could possibly bring, especially if one has been smoking a lot of keef, could create a very intense mental state. So in any case, again, this is a brief introduction for newcomers to this material, and I do hope that you'll go and do more Googling on the web and look at YouTube and find there's a lot of different recordings of various people who've participated in these festivals over the year, and there's a lot of some of varying quality recordings of the musicians of the master musicians of Joujouka. And I recommend, as a starting place, I recommend Brion Jones' Pipes of Pan.